We are being recorded, as you can see, on CCTV, so if there are any questions, please make sure that you speak up, because we want to make sure that everything does get recorded. I'd also ask you to make sure that your cell phones are off. Thank you for coming, and what we expect today will be an interesting and informative morning. The workshop's going to be divided into 3 sessions. Session 1 will provide each of us with information regarding how to meet our legal requirements in the service of the Concord Committee and Boards. The town clerk, Tara, will begin with a discussion of the open meeting law and public records law, and will be followed by town moderator Carmen Rees, who will be presenting ethics and conflict of interest law. There are handouts, so if you haven't gotten them already, you can certainly make sure you grab one before you leave. Session 2, the Select Board member, Stephen Nigg, will provide guidance in effective meeting management. Steve is in his 6th year as a board member and can speak from a lot of experience. At 10:15 or so, there will be a 10-minute break, to be followed then by session 3, public hearing and difficult issues. The public hearing section will be presented by Lynn Huggins, and Mike Lawson will speak on how to deal with difficult issues, perhaps based upon some of his recent experience while serving as chair of the board. There will be a brief period afterwards for questions at the end of the program. We intend to complete the program by around 11:30, and I've been told that it's going to be my job to make sure the program moves along. Thank you all for coming, and at this point I will turn it over to Tara.
Good morning. So I'm Kari Maitari. I'm the town clerk, and I am thrilled to be here to talk about the open meeting law and public records law, believe it or not. And I'm thrilled to serve you. And I want to remind you, yes, you can. I'm sorry. So I'm happy to serve you, and I want to remind you that the town clerk's office is here to serve you. If you ever have any questions, if anything needs to be repeated, we're happy to do that at any time. So I'm talking about open meeting law and public records law. The sunshine laws, the open meeting conflict of interest and public records laws, are intended to provide transparency. This often seems to be at the expense of efficiency, but transparency always comes first. If transparency doesn't happen, these rotating suns can quickly become a spotlight, and that's never a pleasant feeling. Though, as it's about process, you should never take it personally. Always step forward and tell someone, tell the town clerk's office, tell your staff for your committee. So whether you've been elected or appointed, the first step is to take the oath of office. And we're just going to do this. If you'd raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Promise to faithfully and impartially perform the duties of the office to which I have been appointed. Thank you and congratulations. You've all done this, but it's a reminder that once you're appointed or elected, the process, you are not an official member of that body. You're not a voting member until you have been sworn in. When you come to the town clerk's office to be sworn in, you will be given what is now in this committee handbook, contains, among other, lots of useful information and references governing policies, checklists, all kinds of things. You'll be given the open meeting law and conflict of interest or ethics law material. We are required by law to provide this to you. You are required by law to acknowledge this. The last 2 pages of the committee handbook contain the acknowledgments. So once you've gotten it, if you are leafing through at some future point and you see they're there, you need to tear them out, sign them, and return them. We are going to be tracking this information. We will be following up with you. It's very important. There is also the online conflict of interest training, which needs to happen every year. Just so you know, the acknowledgments of the conflict of interest is something that needs to be returned annually. So I will be sending out email reminders annually for you to return those. So let's talk about open meeting law and you. So all oral or written communication through any medium, including electronic mail, between or among a quorum of a public body, is considered deliberation. So that is discussion about any public business that is within the jurisdiction of the board. You need to be aware that all that information needs to be first scheduled on an agenda, but there are some exemptions. Meeting scheduling, which needs to be done among a group, does not count as deliberation, and distribution of material that will be discussed at a meeting is not considered deliberation as long as there are no opinions included, and it is one-way communication. So you let the chair know, you forward the information to the chair then forwards the information along with the agenda, so there is no communication. Remember, you don't want to be in the spotlight. You are stepping into the spotlight as soon as you start that kind of deliberation. What can happen, the unintended consequence of email that can include opinion or discussion is one-on-one, when you have a 5-member body, is considered a sub-quorum, a discussion that is not part of a quorum or a meeting. But as soon as that email from one person to another gets forwarded to a third person, now you've got serial communication, and that's a violation. Social media posting, you're not forbidden from posting things, but if you're posting on something that has to do with the business of your public body, then someone else chiming in from your committee, or then a third person chiming in, you can see where that is suddenly, now you're talking about business. The problem with that is that people didn't know you were going to talk about that business. So it's no longer in the public eye. So practical considerations is, as I said, don't ask for opinions. Beware of replying to all. Some people, if they send material, they will send it to everyone. Again, material, no opinions. Everyone is blind copied. You can't reply all. But it's better just to send it to one person. Send it to the chair. This is process. Process is really important. Limit the use of email to scheduling purposes. And imagine your email appearing on social media. So then the question comes, when can you communicate with your friends who happen to be on this committee? You can socialize, you can go on site visits, you can be at meetings of other boards when there is something that you're interested in. You can't go off and talk among yourselves unless you're in a posted meeting. You can't deliberate when you're at a social event. The appearance is also very important. You don't want people to be wondering, why are these 3 people, I know they're on a committee together, they're off in a corner. Appearance is really important. So public body, this is confusing. This is probably the one thing that I communicate with the Division of Open Government, which is the the body that oversees the open meeting law. What is the difference between a subquorum and a subcommittee? A quorum is a simple majority of the members who are deliberating on the whatever the committee charge is about. The subquorum is less than a quorum, for instance, and this was an example that came up, where someone at a committee is asked to work with a consultant, one person. And then someone else volunteers later to help. That second person has not been officially designated in a role for the public body. Those two people are not deliberating to then report back to the main body. That is a subquorum. That is fewer than a quorum that are helping each other out. They have not been designated officially to do something. This is probably something that is going to be a sort of situational, where we will be asking the Division of Open Government when it comes up, because in some ways it feels like the open meeting law can really get in the way of getting things done, but it is so important to be sure that the little detail of what is actually happening here is determined by the Division of Open Government to be okay in accordance to the law, because they're the ones that are going to hear the complaint. A subcommittee is a group that is designated officially by a public body to do work. They're actually doing committee work, and they're reporting back to the committee. That can be just a couple of members of that committee. That can be people from outside, though there are policies and procedures about who does the appointing in those circumstances. So when there is a need for that, it's always good to go back to the appointing authority before making determinations like that. So let's talk about the meeting. Agendas need to be posted, locations need to be accessible, and discussion is limited to what is on the agenda. Make sure before you post the meeting, that you have meeting space reserved and that the space is adequate for the public that you are expecting, depending on what's on the agenda. The agenda needs to be filed with the town clerk so that we can post it at least 48 hours before the meeting. We have to put a time and a date stamp. Now, I will say there are regulations that are being updated by the Division of Open Government for the open meeting law. We have not gotten that final word. They have closed the public comment period, so we're expecting to hear something in the fall, later in the fall. So we know that a date and time stamp will be required on the posting. The date, time, and location of the meeting, the names of the public bodies participating, the topics in detail. The notice has to be printed clearly, and again, the 48 hours. Emergency sessions, an emergency session is that something unforeseen has happened. So it's not something forgotten. It's something unexpected, requires immediate action, usually relates to public safety. Here's an example of an agenda. Would you attend this meeting? How about this one? You may not want to attend it, but at least you know what to expect. Okay, so you need to give, if you're talking about minutes, give the dates. If you're reviewing proposals of what? It needs to be very specific. Remote participation is a policy that the Select Board has adopted. In order to participate remotely, it's someone who is not able to be at the meeting. A quorum needs to be established in the room. Someone in the room needs to chair the meeting, and that meeting needs to be audible to everyone in the room. Executive sessions, there are 10 reasons to enter executive session. The reason needs to be explained by the chair. It also needs to be posted on the agenda. An executive session always starts in open session, and all members of the body need to vote by roll call vote. That means everyone is saying out loud whether they want to enter executive session or not. And then all votes during the executive session must be by roll call vote. Minutes of an executive session must still be taken. They must be approved. Eventually, the minutes should be released at an open meeting. If there is information that is not ever going to be public, that information gets redacted. But the spirit of the meeting needs to be public. I look a lot at historical information. It's really important to document this evidence of town activity that has made Concord what it is. We need that information, and it needs to be detailed to minutes. In addition to the detail, which doesn't need to be transcript, it needs to be a summary so that a reasonable person can understand what happened at that meeting. Documents that are either available at the meeting or are referenced in the meeting need to be listed in the minutes. Those documents need to be kept with that committee, kept with the minutes for 6 months. They are part of that official record for 6 months. After 6 months, those documents have their own retention value, and then they go to that retention value. So the whole packet, if you will, of information that goes with the minutes does not have to be kept permanently with the minutes. The minutes are permanent, though. Minutes, when they are approved, need to be shared. They need to be shared with your appointing authority. They need to be shared with the town clerk. We post them online. We print out hard copy. We have them back to the 1600s, and we'd like to keep all those minutes. There is a records management policy that is in the committee handbook that will help guide you through minutes taking and remind you about minutes preservation. There is also the Division of Open Government has a number of very useful checklists for entering executive session, posting a meeting, and also creating minutes. Open meeting law complaints are about, there's a process for filing open meeting law complaints. There is a formal process. There is a form. Without the form, it's not considered an official complaint. The form is in the committee handbook so that you have the reference. A complaint has to be filed within 30 days directly to the board or committee. Board or committee has 14 days to respond. That response needs to be in public session. And you should let your committee staff person or the town clerk's office know. Don't take it personally. It's about process. We have to make sure we follow process. If there is something that has happened that generally it's not intentional, the Division of Open Government understands that. When they review a complaint, they will issue a remedy to the complaint. The remedy will be maybe to make minutes available as soon as possible, and that's the end of it. It's intentional violations that they're not very happy about. Okay, examples of complaints: subcommittee meetings weren't posted, email deliberations, posting didn't happen within 48 hours. You can see the list goes on. People care. You're passionate, that's why you're on the committee. You're representing people that are passionate from all different angles at what you're addressing. So you want to make those minutes available. Open meeting law contact information. And now let's jump into public records law. The Freedom of Information Act deals only with federal records. It does not apply to state and local records. The public records law applies to local and state documents. What is considered a public record? Pretty much anything that is recorded. A document that's received for a committee should be acknowledged at a meeting. correspondence, things like that. You can see the select board has a very good model where there's a list of correspondence, all of that information you want to make public. It's your work as part of the public body. Think history when you're doing this. Your email, committee-related email, even if it's your personal email, is subject to public records law. You can get a town email very easily, just ask. Meeting notes taken by the clerk of the committee are considered a public record until minutes are drafted. Then the draft minutes are public record. Once those are approved, then the final minutes. Once the minutes are approved, the notes don't need to be kept, nor does the draft. But there always needs to be that evidentiary document. As I said, meetings discussed or referred to at a meeting. There are exemptions to the public records law. The list is very long. It is the duty of the custodian of public records to supply the exemption. So again, if you receive a request, contact a staff member. We have a burden of time to produce information. The manner of request for public records can take any form of communication, but only written communications can be appealed to the division, to the supervisor of public records. And as I said, there are a number of exemptions. The burden is on the custodian, and the claim for that exemption has to be valid. The response time is very important. Failure to respond can cost the town. And with that, I hand it over to Carmen. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. So I'm just going to skim the surface of conflict of interest law here and tell you a little bit about what more you need to do. And I want also to observe that I personally find conflict of interest law humbling. It's very complex. And there's no expectation that you're going to know all the answers. The key is to know when to ask a question. Okay, so who does the conflict of interest law apply to? It applies to municipal employees. That's all of you. You didn't notice that paycheck, did you? But because you're doing the work of the town as appointees, you are subject to the conflict of interest law. And the conflict of interest law really is dealing with that overlap between public responsibility and private interest. Especially in a small town, it's almost impossible not to bump into yourself as you are doing the work of your committee or your board. So the source of authority for the conflict of interest law is Chapter 268A. The State Ethics Commission is the body that is in charge of enforcing the ethics law. They can issue fines of up to $5,000. They can hand out jail terms. But I think by far the majority of complaints that the Ethics Commission receives are dealt with by public information, public education letters. They understand that this is a complex area and that people do make mistakes, and that most of the time the mistakes are the result of a lack of understanding of what the rules are, or a lack of recognition that there's a question. And that then the commission takes on as a public education responsibility. All their public education letters and all their cases are on their website, and they make for some very interesting reading to see exactly how people get in trouble. I should note that there is also a special employee, special municipal employee status. There are particular qualifications that can entitle someone to be a special municipal employee instead of a municipal employee. That designation has to be made by the Board of Selectmen, and there is a standing list of boards and committees that have been designated as special municipal employees, and that's findable through a search on the website, on the town website. And when we get there, I'll tell you the one difference that makes. The rules are less stringently applied to special municipal employees than they are to municipal employees. Okay, and I should add that complaints can be filed anonymously with the Ethics Commission, and the Ethics Commission does investigate complaints. Okay, so the purpose of the law is twofold. It's integrity in government. We want to be doing things for objective and public reasons and in good faith, but also, very importantly, for the confidence of the public that things are being done objectively, with the best interests of the town in mind, and without any hidden agenda or undisclosed interests that might be motivating somebody. Okay. What we all have to do as elected officials, as appointed board and committee members, is educate ourselves on the conflict of interest law. There is a state ethics commission tutorial. There's an assessment that you take online. The assessment is humbling. And you just keep answering those questions until you get them all right. You then print your conflict of interest assessment certificate form. This is mine. Carrie, I'll be delivering it to you. And you've got to do it every 2 years, okay? And it's worth consulting the advisory letters that the commission has published, or just taking a breeze through to see what kinds of cases they've decided, so you see the various ways in which people have gotten in trouble. So, again, it's complex. Get advice. I have called this number any number of times, and it's easy. They really do call you back the same day. They answer your question. They give you a reference number for your answer, and then you can have comfort that you have recognized a question, gotten an answer, and you know what you're supposed to do now. You can also make a request online, or you can send a letter requesting an informal written advisory opinion. Those latter two will take longer. But the phone call is very effective, and I heartily encourage all of you, if you have any doubt in your mind about whether you should be doing something, making a disclosure, what disclosure form you should be using, etc., call them up. So, categories of conflicts of interest. This is kind of there are more, but this is kind of a broad highlight. Things fall into the category of soliciting or accepting gifts. So you can never have a quid pro quo. That's also called a bribe. So I think we all understand that that's a thing you can't do. But there's also this $50 rule, and the $50 rule is not only for an individual gift, but it's also for cumulative gifts within the space of a year. So if someone's buying you lunch a lot of times, when you're chatting about, if that adds up to $50, you have a problem. So you can't get over that. There are a lot of exceptions to this. The fruit basket that comes to the planning board, if they bring it to the planning department, they can accept it and bring it to the planning department and share it with everybody, and that's okay. And as many rules as there are exceptions. And that's another thing it's worth making a phone call about. The fruit basket comes and you think, what do I do with the fruit basket? You can call the State Ethics Commission and they will tell you what to do with the fruit basket. The other thing that sort of falls under this solicitation or acceptance of gifts heading is using your position to gain advantages that an ordinary person would not have. If you get stopped by a police officer, you cannot mention that you are an elected official or point out that you're the chair of the planning board and you're on your way. You cannot do that. That is a prime example of using your position to get something that you should not otherwise be getting. But there are lots of other ways to do it too, so be careful of that. Nepotism and self-dealing. This is a big one, financial interest. And it's not just for you, but it's also for your immediate family, and it's also for business affiliates. So if you have a business in town and you have partners, or if your mom lives in town or your brother lives in town, the interests of those people can also create a conflict of interest for you. And financial interest is pretty broadly defined. If you, for example, live next door to a big real estate project that's being proposed, arguably that you have a financial interest there because it might affect the value of your property. Okay, negotiating for employment is another one. You can read about that. Confidential information is another. Not all of us, but many of us on our boards and committees and in our elected capacity get confidential information when people are applying for licenses or what have you. And it is a violation of the conflict of interest law to expose any of that confidential information. So I'm going to be careful with that too. Divided loyalties. And this is the place where it makes a difference to be a special municipal employee. So in general, you cannot represent, if you are a board or committee member or an elected official, you can't, if you're a lawyer or an architect, you can't represent somebody's private interests before a board or a committee. Similarly, you can't speak on behalf of a group within town before a board or committee. Now, if you're a special municipal employee, you can. You can do that as long as it's not your own board and as long as it's not touching anything that you have responsibility for. So if you were, for example, on the conservation board and there was a wetlands issue that was part of a project, you could not represent somebody before the planning board on the same project because you would touch it. But if it was wholly separate and there was no issue having to do with what your commission deals with, then you could do it. And this is a place where people get tripped up sometimes in town because we really want people who practice in town and have that kind of professional expertise to help us with our board and committee work, but it does mean that not only they, but their business partners may have a problem in terms of where they can go and what they can do. It's definitely open to people to ask for special municipal employee status from the Board of Selectmen if their committee doesn't already have it. And I can think of examples where when I was on the Board of Selectmen, we gave it to people who were, for example, lawyers representing the town on a single case, that you would give them special municipal employee status so that they could still represent other people before, for example, the planning board or the Board of Health. Okay, I should mention also that the exceptions, a big exception to the financial interest issue is that if you believe as a board or committee member that notwithstanding the fact that your mom lives next door to a project or you have some financial interest in it, that you can still be impartial. Or if you have a relationship, it's your best friend's house, so that could be an appearance of a conflict where somebody might think that you would be biased because your best friend lives next door to the project. If you believe that you can be unbiased, you can submit a disclosure form to your appointing authority with a copy to the town clerk, because it has to be a public record. And if your appointing authority agrees, yeah, that's not a problem, you can do this, then you can go ahead and act. That's typically not open to elected officials because they don't have an appointing authority. So there's nobody that they can ask. But for board and committee members, they can do that. Okay. There's also a general policy exception on financial interests. So for example, if, say it again? Oh, talking to the microphone. Oh, move it along. Am I running out of time? Okay. So the General policy on financial interest. If you're on the light board and you're acting on rates, everybody's affected the same, so you can act on the rates. Rule of necessity. So you're on the planning board and everybody is conflicted out, but a decision has to be made. Well, now what are you going to do? There is a rule of necessity that allows you to act, notwithstanding a conflict, but you're always going to know that's coming before it comes. So get advice from town council and know what you're doing before you do that. Okay. When you can't participate, you really can't participate. So what does not participating mean? It means you can't talk about an issue with your fellow board members and committee members. You can't vote. You can't delegate work on it. And the best practice is to actually leave the room. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean if I'm in a butter and I've recused myself because I must and I can't be impartial, I can still speak before my board or committee, but I can only speak on behalf of myself. I can't speak on behalf of my whole neighborhood, and I should leave the room after I have spoken so that I'm not there exerting an influence. Okay. So you've got to complete the appropriate disclosure form if you are going to disclose. There's upwards of 20 different disclosure forms. It's hard to figure out which. The town clerk's office can help you with that, or the ethics commission can help you with that. And again, form goes to your appointing authority with the town clerk, and you should have a written assent from your appointing authority before you act on something after you've done this disclosure form. And then you need at the public meeting to disclose that you had a disclosure to make, that you've done everything you were supposed to do, dotted your I's, crossed your T's, and you have received an assent to participate. Okay. Write the number down. And it's on the website if you lose it. We're just going to wrap up quickly. I'm going to ask Carrie to come back. And if you haven't, are there any questions for me or for Carrie? Yes.
Question for Kara. On public records request, the last slide said that the request has to be filled within 10 calendar days. I thought it was 10 business days.
Yes, that law has changed. So it's now 10 calendar days, but the respondent is urged to provide the actual material within the 10 calendar days, provided electronically whenever possible, and the charge has gone down from 20 cents a page to 5 cents a page if it is by paper. There's a, if it takes more than 10 days, there's ultimately 25 calendar days, business days allowed. If there's any suggestion that it's going to take longer than that, an appeal has to be made to the supervisor of public records. So they're actually becoming stricter on that, where it used to be that you had to just respond within 10 days and then arrange for, in a reasonable time in the future, get the material. That there is now a deadline to that, and that's 25 business days.
Yes. So the question is, how does the conflict of interest law impact consultants? Are they bound by the conflict of interest law? And I think the answer is generally yes, that consultants who are hired by the town to do the town's work are considered municipal employees. They may be special municipal employees if they're designated to be such by the select board, but they are bound by the conflict of interest law. Yes. So the question is, what if you wanted a board or committee, to approach a board or committee and ask them to take a particular action in exchange for a gift you might give to Open Table or some other charitable organization? Boy, I'd call the Ethics Commission on that one. What do you think? Yeah, I'd call the Ethics Commission. So this is what I mean. Like you're in some line drawing territory there, and I would not necessarily know where to draw that line, I would call up and they would give you an answer in one day. Yes? So can you provide a brief summary of the question?
Where do I begin? So, thank you. Okay, so to start with the sub-quorum subcommittee question, that is something that I just recently learned myself about the sub-quorum, and I think it really depends on the circumstance and what you are calling discussion or deliberation. So you can't have a... Oh, I'm sorry. So there was a question about whether a sub-quorum or defining a sub-quorum that can deliberate on an area that the public body has responsibility for? No? Why don't you come up here and ask the question, or maybe I can bring the microphone to you.
No, just,
Okay.
well, I'm afraid we're going to do violence to it. But we're almost out of time for questions, so.
I only stick to that aspect. The others you can answer. So actually,
Let's do one question at a time, maybe.
okay. This particular one actually was not exactly a question. It has been something that I have thought all along, that when a sub-quorum of committee members have been assigned a task, they become designated to carry out that task, and in public body definition, they become a subcommittee. This is different from a sub-quorum spontaneously gathering to discuss committee matters. So that was my first point, and thank you for, so I forget, the other one was whether, I guess to state that draft minutes are also to be made available to the public. And also my question was, the Attorney General assistant said that consultants' emails and proceedings were public record, and I am inquiring about this because that wasn't something that was discussed in detail at that open meeting law training. Thank you.
Okay, so public records law is different, so that would have been, that they probably wouldn't have gone into too much detail as far as draft minutes. They are subject to public record, as are meeting notes until the draft minutes are created. What was the other question?
No.
Was the, no.
Whether consultants
Right, so the communications between the town and the consultant those communications are subject to the public records law because it has to do with the public body. Whether there are exemptions to the public records law are up to the custodian of the records to determine, but the assumption is that any communication that involves the public body, the town government, is public.
So, one more question.
Yes.
Yeah. We're
Thank you for
gonna,
remembering.
if anybody else has one more question, okay. Yep, go ahead.
An ethics question. If a member of a public body is inviting a consultant to their association's private dinner, is that a conflict of interest?
So the question is if a member of
Of a public body is
inviting a
inviting a consultant relevant to that public body's charge to their association's private dinner.
So that would be a question for the public consultant. Well, actually, that could go two ways. The question could be for the board or committee member, the member of the public body. Are they trying to use their position on a board or committee to get something they wouldn't otherwise get? That would be a question. And I suppose the question for the consultant would be whether is going to the dinner worth more than $50? There are exceptions to going to dinners where if it's a valid educational enterprise or informational enterprise where you're going to learn something that's actually going to be useful to the discharge of your duties, then it's okay to accept transportation and having somebody else cover the cost for you going. This is another one where if I were the party in interest, I would call the Ethics Commission to get their answer. And I should mention that you can only call the Ethics Commission to ask about your own issues. So you can't call them and ask if somebody else has an ethical problem. They won't tell you. Even if you're the appointing authority, they won't tell you. They will only answer questions for individuals with their own issues. And I'm sorry, I think we do, I've already got us like woefully behind schedule, so I think we now need to move on to session 2. Thank you.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming out this morning. Let's see. All right, session 2, my topic of discussion is to dive into the art of effective meeting management. You know, we all are on a committee or thinking of becoming a member of a committee or board, and you always start off with your committee charge, your responsibilities and duties assigned to that group is kind of your mission statement. And underlying that is your importance in the process of taking care of town business, making decisions in the best interest of the town, as well as serving as that connection between the public, to be that mediator or facilitator of getting that information to the public, getting their opinions, and helping you make your decisions accordingly. So this morning you've learned about a lot of things you can do and you can't do, and I think that's good to be educated on that, to maintain transparency to the highest level. But now we can finally just talk about having a meeting. So what we'll talk about this morning is essential tips and processes on how to be as effective as possible in preparing for meetings and interacting with the public and your town officials. We will constantly stress pre-planning and preparation is probably the secret to really making sure the best possible efficient outcome for your public gatherings. Thoughts on how running the meeting could roll out, and following up with various tasks and items to prepare for the next. So, planning and kind of visualizing how the meeting will kind of unfold is probably the critical point for the chair. And it all starts with the agenda. It's making sure that in a series of knowing your deadlines of when the agenda needs to be posted is probably the date that you have to work your kind of work off of that date backwards to make sure that, one, you communicate with your town department or administrator on if there are what applications are being required to be heard at your meeting, as well as any other items associated with your board or committee's topics of discussion for that evening. It's very similar to really listing out those items that are required for that evening, kind of understanding your time limit, and making sure all items are kind of prioritized in the proper order. And once that list is prepared, you give your board administrator or yourself the time to prepare the informational packet and have that ready with the scheduling of your meeting, which is, as mentioned earlier, minimum 48 hours before or 2 days before, and make sure that, is the agenda and the room that's available, appropriate. So if you've got a big hearing, say planning board or zoning board of appeals usually has, will do many meetings in this room itself to accommodate a large public participation. Whereas other committees, I think their requirements for space are much more minimal. And also, if your committee has the requirement to be televised, you just have to make sure the room that's selected or the venue allows for that, or if there are cameras pre-set in the room, or such as this venue, or just make sure that there's room for CCTV to prepare their camera and support staff to televise the space, the meeting. And of course, we can't stress enough to use the town website as the information holding location, so that the public, your board members, can all kind of access the same info consistently. All right. So we've got the room set up. We've planned the agenda. Once, you check with your administrator, or if it's your own committee, you get your nameplates, you've got easels set up, you just really think of every detail needed to make sure the meeting runs smoothly in terms of physical location and presentation materials. It's really getting to the meeting itself. We'll talk about the role of the chair in the committee, the internal relationships of the board or committee members with the chair, the time management involved in making sure the meeting runs smoothly, and of course citizen engagement, and also talk about the follow-up at the end of the meeting. So the role of the chair. Now, if you're here and you're a board or just a committee member or board member, it's kind of, there's an expectation as well for you in discussion of the role of the chair, because it's how that individual, how she will interact with the public as well as with the board members. So it's also, it, that individual serves as the facilitator, prepares, of course, for the meeting, and will also encourage members to also do their own preparation for same meeting. He or she will keep the members and attendees mindful of board, committee, and purpose. I think I've found in my experiences, introductory and welcoming statements at the beginning of the meeting are the perfect opportunity to welcome the public, inform them and educate them on, the purpose of the board and the committee, what their purview is, as well as a way of the opportunity to let them know what the ground rules are or the method in which the meeting will be held. And throughout the meeting, the chair will serve as the facilitator of the process. It's really not their role will be to make sure things are moving along smoothly, objectively. It's about making sure everyone at the table has that opportunity, and the public will have the opportunity to participate in the process. And there'll be moments when, say, the board or committee is deliberating, is when the chair will have that opportunity to express his or her opinion on the particular discussion at hand. But for the most part, during the process, he or she is there to make sure that the sequence of discussion is moving along and staying focused. If there is some conflicts, I think the chair is definitely the lead person who will try to, one, state the problem at hand and try to find paths to resolution. And most of all, I mean, it's important to know that the role of the chair, it's really, they are in charge of running the meeting and the committee. So it's important to know that it's the chair's responsibility to make sure being fair in the process and also having the authority to kind of keep moving things forward. So the next topic is internal relationships the chair would have with their committee members. In the process at the meeting, definitely you're trying to keep the group focused and moving forward. And there are times it's the committee composition. You'll have newer members and senior members who have been through or on other town boards, and at the same time, maybe a town citizen who has, this is their first committee that they've signed up for. So I think you have to be very aware of kind of the dynamics that you're working, the folks you're working with, and kind of helping those who may not know or need a little encouragement to participate, because you want everyone really being engaged. And so there's kind of levels where you're enlightening your membership to the process at hand, and really kind of draw them in, find that balanced method where all participants have equal time, where one individual doesn't kind of capture the majority of the conversation. And in that way, I think the members will contribute to the conversation where you all can gain a consensus or determine kind of a final outcome in the deliberations. Now, time management. It always starts with the drafting of the agenda. You'll put down the required applications that need to be heard that day if you're that type of board or committee. And sometimes after you've written that out, you'll know right then if it's going to be a short one this evening or it's going to take a while, and then everyone does that sigh whenever you think about that. Those meetings are, just you need you just need to really focus on making sure the group understands the process, and to make sure that you really provide a summary of the format of how hearings or discussions will unfold. So you would kind of not declare, but explain at the meeting that, when a hearing begins, the applicant or the filing group will make their presentation, followed by questions from your board or committee, which are more just factual information about the information at hand. Once those questions are completed by your board, you can then ask the public, are there questions and comments? So they would also get their information from the applicant, and then move to a deliberation period between the groups, and make your motions and hopefully get through that particular topic. And one of the last critical items is, of course, citizen engagement. The public is always welcome and encouraged to join our meetings. And it's important to make sure you provide that transparency to them about the process before, during, and after meetings. So beforehand, it's using the website to share the information packets that your members are receiving with them. The agenda will make the agenda as precise and detailed as possible, so they know the topic at hand, what's going to be discussed that evening. Everyone can anticipate whether that's issues that they are very interested in joining the group for. And during, it's deciding on when and how you wish to have them participate in the process. I know in some meetings, Select Board will always have a period scheduled in the agenda at the end of our meetings for general public comment, but there are moments when we know certain topics on the agenda, folks are there for that specific conversation. So that's, it's an opportune time to allow them to speak to that item right then while you're discussing, or definitely before we make a decision. You want to hear if folks are willing to take the time and come see us, that they let us know their thoughts. You can also share emails and correspondence that you've received from the public with the board, with the participants or the public in your meeting, so that they're aware of all the information your board and committee has been gathering to prepare for deliberation and make a decision. I've found that making sure it's a focused discussion or participation from the public at each application is probably the most effective way for the public to participate. Rather than taking everything and kind of either moving it to the beginning or end, I think it loses its focus for the committee. So I think that's important to consider. It's really the public's opportunity to kind of come and participate in town government, and you want to encourage that. So if you're kind of giving that perception of they're not feeling connected to what you're going through, it's not really what our mission is about here. And I think having them understand you have a well-organized, structured process that they're engaged in directly will not only encourage them to feel confident in your decision, but you never know, you might get a green card out of that at the end of the meeting. So that's kind of a plus. And at the end of the meeting, which is always tough, especially if there's a lot going on and a lot of things have been happening, you should take a moment at the end to really summarize next steps, assign responsibilities if there's board members or committee members are involved, so that you're preparing for the next meeting. And that kind of helps you set up your agenda. If it's a continuance or an ongoing conversation, it really will allow you to almost start a new outline for your next scheduled meeting. I think one of the more critical things are when the public has a request for additional information. I find it important that you try to address their requests and concerns as soon as possible. Again, so that they have that, they feel they are engaged in the process as much as possible. And thank you so much for being a part of our process. Yes, any questions? Yes.
How should handouts from a meeting be made available to the public either at the meeting or afterwards, online or in some other way?
Yes, the question was regarding how documentation either before or during the meeting is made accessible to the public. I think old school, everyone would just make copies out on the desk. You can come in, sign in, and there's an agenda printed and so forth. But I've found, just with the things discussed earlier today, with open meeting law and email restrictions, and that we should be using that website as the information library for your committee. I mean, it's really I think right now, is it town staff kind of uploads everything for us? And maybe if that becomes, yes. Yeah. But I think that's the best way to do it, because I know, just even using professional experience, when you're trying to get a team, sharing information with your team, and you're trying to hit every individual possible, I think it's easier served by saying, hey, it's in our project website that everyone has access to.
So would you anticipate that somebody should be able to see within, I don't know, say 10 days after a meeting, they should be able to access all of the documents that were handed out at that meeting when they're sitting at home in their pajamas at 11 o'clock at night in a snowstorm from online? Because there are things like town budget, the luminous amounts of things that come out in school budgets at the finance committee, for instance. They're huge, huge amounts of information, and typically I don't believe they've ever been available, not readily available online. So would you, that's a lot of either electronic uploading or scanning. How do you anticipate these should be available?
That's a good question. I mean, I think those documents are made available in some form. Is it digital, or is it?
Usually they're attached when the agenda is posted, at least now. I mean, in the past,
Right.
it's whatever. But now they're attached to the agenda when it's posted. So usually it's right there in whatever file is posted with the agenda.
So yeah.
Or does the same thing for the school meeting.
Right. That information right now is bundled together with the agenda off of the website. So it's probably a decent download once every couple of meetings. It's probably.
The whole budget thing, that may be, I think, for the school and so on, that may not be.
Okay, but it is available. So town budget and items such as the school budget would be available somewhere online, but not necessarily with the agenda for the meeting.
And for things that are handed out at the meeting and were not available beforehand to be posted with the agenda, should those be made available at the same time as the minutes, which would be,
With the minutes.
I think by law, you
It's, it is the 10-day limit, correct? A timeline?
The documents that are referenced have to be listed in the minutes, so that at the very least, the public knows what documents were available. If public demand is to have certain of those documents online, then that's our job, is to get them online. We have a public information officer, and we will work really hard to do that. But at the very least, the documents need to be listed.
Yes.
Whose responsibility is it to make sure that minutes are updated overall for all committees? For instance, if you go presently to various committees, you'll see some committees there are no minutes, and other committees there have regular minutes kept up to date and are easily accessible. Is Carrie, is that your responsibility to oversee that and give them a nudge, or how does that happen?
That is something that we'd like to do. Yes. Those committees that have town staff members are able to, they will upload those minutes. Committees that don't have staff members, our first priority is to make sure we have printed copy, because that's the permanent copy. Our next priority is to get them online, and that is something that we're working on. And also making sure that we have minutes for all the agendas that were posted.
And I know, I know our select board chair has chair meeting breakfasts, and we've been kind of trying to encourage that requirement to post our meeting minutes. But I think the public has definitely been letting us know if we've been, you know, some are not making the timeline, and that's important. So I agree. It starts with the chair. And then we are aware of it. So to kind of have a boss who does the oversee, I don't know where else we can go with that.
I think also what happened on occasion is the committees would approve their minutes. They would have the minutes up to date, but they were not getting them necessarily into the clerk's office. And that step is we're trying to impress upon the committee members that that's the necessary step. One other question that came up in one meeting that I went to was whether somebody who hadn't attended the meeting for which the minutes were to be approved could vote to approve them. And my understanding was that they could.
Yes.
So that's kind of a bit of information, because it can cause a problem when you have a committee that you don't have, you otherwise wouldn't have the quorum. And so the answer to that for those, the issue comes up, is that a committee member who did not attend the meeting for which the minutes are to be approved can still vote to approve those minutes.
So it seems like there's often a 30-day lag on posting minutes, because typically committees aren't approving the minutes of a meeting until the next meeting. That tends to be 30 days later, and then it takes them a little time after that to get the minutes posted. So I guess the only way to do it faster is to post draft minutes, but that's confusing if you post draft minutes and then post the real minutes, take them off and post the real minutes later.
Yeah, Carmen just mentioned that you'll have a committee meeting, and say they meet monthly, you won't see meeting minutes approved until a month, the next meeting, and then I think that's when the clock could start on the minimum, the amount of time necessary to post. But if you post draft minutes in the interim, the risk of possible confusion of, you know, if they're altered or edited could cause more trouble than, more confusion than it's worth. But that's...
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could clarify your statement just now about minimum time to post. I thought it was within, I thought at 10 days after the meeting, a draft or some form of minutes is by law to be made available if somebody makes a request.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
I can tell you that I'm aware that the Division of Open Government in their amended regulations will have some kind of clarification language specifying that within the next 3 meetings, the minutes need to be approved. But because of the timing of when committees meet, it's related to the meeting dates rather than the days. I'm not aware of a timeline for having draft minutes created and made public.
Yes.
I have a question. Part of your presentation was about civic engagement and about the need to get citizen input before making decisions. If a member of the citizenry of Concord feel that a public board committee has not reached out and has not obtained citizen input before making an important decision, what are some effective techniques to remedy that situation?
So, Steve, I think maybe I'll address that a little bit, because it will make that distinction between the public hearing and the public meeting.
Okay.
So that
Yeah.
requires you to stick around and listen to session 3.
That's the. Yeah, I think my presentation was the ideal setup, or the ideal meeting. Now we'll go into the possibilities or the things that can happen.
Yes, try to be brief.
About draft minutes, I think it is possible to put them on as current meeting agendas, so that will clear the confusion about where minutes are posted.
Okay. So that-
I want to thank the select board for hearing public comments, inviting public comment after each item. I think that is very considerate. Thank you very much. It helps. One philosophical point about consensus. I understand why you would want to reach consensus. However, democratically, I think it is also okay when consensus is hard to achieve to record that, to make that public, to invite more input, etc. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Are they subject to the same open meeting law regulations as any?
I don't believe consultants, as far as the work that they're doing on their own, what they're doing, they're, if,
Let me just go further than that. Let's say that the consultant is consulting with a group in the town on behalf of the committee. Should that meeting be open to the public?
depends. Right, depends on who the group is. Has the group been publicly,
Let's say that it's just the consultant meeting with, say, the Arts Council of Concord to get input for a task that they're engaged in on behalf of the town.
is the Arts Council a public body? It's a matter of who the consultant is meeting with. If the consultant is meeting with a public body, that meeting has to be posted. A public body is a body that, whether they have been appointed or elected, they have been brought together to perform a public service, a public function. There is a charge for that committee. That's defined in the open meeting law. And so if there was a question about a consultant speaking to a group and I was called about it, I would call the Division of Open Government to get clarification, because there are so many variables. Okay.
Yes.
If you're holding a meeting, a regular meeting, and you're holding it in your normal room that usually accommodates the required number of members and accommodates the public as well, and suddenly at the beginning of the meeting, a ton of people show up, and the room is not large enough to accommodate all of them, are you still allowed to hold a meeting?
You would have to find, the question was about if you have a scheduled meeting, a certain room is reserved for your meeting, and there are more attendees than the room capacity will allow. You would need to find a venue that allows for that group participate. So say if we were in the select board room down the hall and needed a much bigger room, it's easily resolved. Well, if there's a meeting here in this room at the same time and there are no other available rooms, you would have to reschedule the meeting because the public needs to be able to participate. So,
I think that type of question also Mike will probably address in the difficult issues section. So some of these are probably getting into the difficult issue area.
Yes. I think it's usually it's public demand. Select board was televised initially or solely, the one meeting that the public had access, school committee, but then there was more interest in having FinCom is a recent group that's televised. I think planning board, and that's all relatively new within the past couple of years. So a lot of it's kind of IT related, just finding venues, which we could even have set cameras to do that. But it is a new experience for some boards and committees. I tend not to rewatch unless I need information. I don't want to see how I looked, so I just you kind of forget about it and just try to be yourself. Yeah, thank you.
Can I just say something about,
please.
Sorry, regarding taping, audio or videotaping. If someone wishes to audio or videotape a meeting, they need to let the chair know, and the chair needs to publicly announce it, and it has to be allowed.
I think I would only add that each committee, I think, needs to kind of consider, because they're all different. Committees that like the historic districts or historical, where they need to be almost projecting information so that the public can see it. Those can be kind of tricky. Some of the other committees are perhaps a little bit smaller. I do think all committees would benefit by having their documents, the minutes which are expected to be approved available as a handout for the committees. And I know some do and some don't. But, I think we're a work in progress, and let's just, if everybody can kind of think to themselves, how can we make it more informative for the public who do show up at these, everybody's going to benefit. So it's probably worth taking a break at this point for probably 10 to 15 minutes. There is refreshments, and we have session 3 will be answering many of these questions. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Mike will describe and address difficult issues that he's had experience in dealing with. Lynn, if we can turn it over to you.
Thanks. Problem with going later in the session is there's going to be some redundancy. I apologize for that. Maybe I could be more positive. We'll look at it as reinforcement instead of redundancy. But so you're going to hear a couple things over again. And this is going to hit on the highlights. There are so many nuances. I'm going to talk specifically about public hearings. For every hearing, there's a nuance. So that just comes from experience. But hopefully I can hit the highlights. And this builds on everything that you've already heard. Take everything that you heard in the first couple of sessions. It applies to a public hearing. And particularly a lot of the things that Steve said about running a public meeting, because it's very often your public hearing takes place in the context of a public meeting, and you'll shift between one and the other. So everything that Steve said about running an efficient and effective public meeting will apply to the public hearing. So the primary distinction between public hearing and a public meeting, and this goes to the question that was raised, is a public meeting. The public has a right to attend an open session of a meeting, but they don't have the right to speak. They can speak only at the discretion of the chair. So that is up to the chair prior to the meeting to make that determination. At a public hearing, the public has the right to be heard before the board reaches a determination. So because of that, public hearings tend to be a little more formal, a little more structured. A board's determination may be subject to further review and appeal to the courts. And so that's going to dictate that you're just a little more formal in your hearing process. A couple different types of public hearings that you would typically think of might be a legislative, where the hearing is really collecting information upon which to base a policy decision. For example, the light board, might hold a hearing to gather information on setting, what the future development of the town's electrical supply might be. That would be a legislative hearing. A quasi-judicial hearing that will result in a decision on a particular application or the issuance of a permit. So we often think of those as special permits issued by the Board of Appeals, the Planning Board, alteration decisions made by the Historic Districts Commission. Those are quasi-judicial hearings. I think of public hearings have several purposes. You want to receive public input. You're required to hear what the public has to say. You're providing due process for people whose property or financial interests are going to be are at stake at the hearing. You're creating a record for any appeal that may be made subsequent to the board's determination. And I think really importantly is you are fostering respect for the rule of law within the community. And you do that by making principled decisions in a fair and transparent way. So I think of the overarching goal of a public hearing is to provide a full and fair process to both the applicant and to the public through which the board reaches a reasoned, principled decision in a fair and efficient way. Steve mentioned getting prepared before a public meeting. Same applies to a public hearing. You can go a long way to have an effective public hearing by doing some pre-meeting planning. And a lot of that responsibility will fall to the chair. So, making sure that everyone is aware how the meeting will run, how the motions will be made, how the discussion will be handled. All of that is an obligation of the chair to make clear not only to the public attending the hearing, but also to the other members sitting on the board with you, so that everybody's on the same page. So prior to the meeting, prior to the hearing, as Steve said, you want to determine the level of public interest. If your board has staff, they'll probably have received information that's going to lead you to believe that there's a lot of public interest. And so if you know that there's going to be a high level of interest, you want to reflect respect for that interest in when you schedule the timing of your hearing. So don't hold a really important public hearing on the 3rd of July or, sometime when you just know it's going to be very inconvenient for the members of the public to attend. As Steve said, you want to secure an adequate hearing space. That just fosters a sense of inclusion, and if people are standing out in the hall, they don't really feel included. Similarly to that, you want to make sure you've got adequate accommodations for any audio or visual needs that might happen. So a lot of hearings might be around maps or plans or some sort of visual context that people just simply need to be able to see, and then people need to be able to hear. And that the hearing goes both ways, in my opinion, from both the public who's attending the meeting needs to be able to hear what's being said, and it can be very distracting when you're sitting on a board and the members of the public are talking amongst themselves during the hearing, and the board needs to be able to hear what's being said by an applicant or another speaker. And that would fall to the chair, in my opinion, to just remind people that we're all here to listen. And then you want to identify before the meeting if there's some issues that might require additional staff input, or you might even need to seek advice from town council. And there is a process for that that you would need to follow. So you'd have to be aware that that might take extra time. The hearing process itself, you've got your agenda, stick with your agenda. The chair might want to consider making an opening statement. Steve alluded to this. I think, in particular, if the hearing has brought out members of the public who don't normally attend meetings, it's really good practice for the chair to announce in advance of the meeting what the procedure is going to be, what the board hopes to gain from listening to the public, and what the process is going to be. I think that really helps the public understand and accept the decision that's ultimately reached. There is often, if you're on a board that has staff, staff will make a report and the board will ask questions. Of course, the applicant will make a presentation. That presentation is being made to the board. It's not being made to the public. The board is the body that's holding the hearing. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I got out of context here with my cards, so I'm going to back up. After making that opening statement on procedure, the chair needs to open the meeting. And so a hearing has been allotted a specific time on your agenda, and you open the meeting at that time on the agenda. So if you've got a meeting, and within your meeting you're holding 2 hearings, and the first one is scheduled to be heard at 7:30, you would open it at 7:30. Say the second one was scheduled to be opened at 8, and your first hearing is a breeze and you finish in 10 minutes. You don't open your 8 o'clock hearing until 8 o'clock. So what do you do? So you can turn to administrative tasks. There are going to be other things on your agenda. For example, your draft minutes. You might have 2 or 3 minutes that need to be reviewed. So you can just turn your attention and fill that time by taking up an administrative task until the time for your next hearing has arrived, and then you can open that hearing. That's rarely happens that way, that you're not actually running behind, but just in case. So then you'd have your applicant presentation, your staff report. The board will ask the applicant any questions that they have. And once the board has satisfied the board members' questions to the applicant, you can open up the meeting to the public. Again, there are a lot of people who want to speak. It's a high interest issue. I think it's really good for the chair to announce if you've decided if there are going to be any ground rules on speakers. For example, time limits. You got to run your meeting efficiently, so you really can't let people run on and on and on endlessly, but you also want to be fair. So, that setting a time limit of, say, 2 minutes per speaker, letting people know in advance that's how you're going to handle it, that really helps enhance a sense of balance and fairness, and also keeps you running an efficient meeting. So announce if you're going to do that at the beginning of the public testimony, and enforce it consistently. Don't change the rules partway through. You want to remind the speakers that their comments should be directed to the board. You just don't want to open up your hearing and turn it into a public debate. And you should, again, the chair really should express an expectation of civility. And then the board, likewise, needs to reflect that level of civility back to the members of the public who are attending the hearing. So anyone who speaks, they have to state their name and their address for the record. If you received a written comment prior to the hearing, that should be acknowledged on the record. Sometimes the people might also be attending personally, but not everyone is comfortable getting up and speaking. So I think it's a good idea to just say the number of comments that you received, and kind of give some idea of what type of comments they were. So the board is not required to respond to public comment. It is a really good practice, though, if a factual or a process question has been asked, to answer that if you can, just so people are feeling as though they are understanding the process that's being followed. Don't engage in debate. Just don't do it. It can be tempting. You need to be attentive to what's being said, but really non-reactive. Issues can bring out very strong feelings, particularly if it's a high interest issue, and you need to respect those strong feelings and the fact that there are different points of view, but again, demand civility and reflect that civility back to those people making comments. So, after everyone has spoken who wishes to, you need to close the hearing. And unless for some reason, sometimes the hearing will need to be continued. You need additional information before you can reach a decision. Maybe you had so many people who wanted to speak that you simply ran out of time, or it just, you realize you need to extend that opportunity to another date. You would continue the hearing. But if none of those things happen, you close the hearing. And once you've closed the hearing, it's not appropriate to take any more public comment. That opportunity has ended. And then the board wants to deliberate and vote. And even if you think you've heard it all before and you know exactly in your mind where the determination should land, the board really should take time and reflect. You do not want to give a perception that everybody made up their mind before you ever had the hearing. Allow the board to talk amongst themselves, and the chair role really is to draw out those discussions and touch base with each of the board members about what they've heard and where they think it's going, try to build consensus and articulate what the decision looks like, and then vote on that decision. So I think taking all of these steps, in my experience, goes a really long way to achieving those overarching goals of balancing the right of public participation with conducting an orderly and efficient hearing on an application. And I can't imagine, given all we've heard today, that anything could go wrong. Never had that experience. So, Mike, I'm not sure you need to, I think we're done. But just in case, and I'm happy to answer questions. I know that was a fairly quick overview, but you heard a lot of the detail earlier, and I don't want to bore you. Things can go wrong. And so open up, and Mike has a lot of experience with that, so I'll turn it over to him. You want to come up here, Mike?
Thanks, Lynn. So we're going to get new batteries put in the mic, and then we'll be off in a flasher. So my session is called What Could Possibly Go Wrong? And for you folks here who've had experience being on committees for a while know that something almost always goes wrong, but most of them are perfectly manageable. So this is our chance to sort of, what questions do you have, or what's gone wrong at one of your committee meetings, and then we'll try to get people's input to see how we solve these. So what I'm going to do is when a question is asked, I'm going to repeat the question, and then if somebody has a really cool answer to it, I'm going to hand them the mic so that they can tell us what the really cool answer is, okay? So please. Well, I'll take the first crack at answering that. I think Lynn has. Sorry. Repeat the question. So, what happens when you're running a meeting and somebody just rambling on and on and on, or you're repeating stuff, and do you have to keep entertaining those kind of remarks? Short answer: no. But Lynn had the right answer. Set the ground rules before you start. Everybody gets to talk. You've got 2 minutes, whatever it is. And when the public meeting, if it's a public hearing, when it's over, it's over.
And I mean, we literally, you use your phone or something and you set the 2 minutes. So it's very... Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the person gets up to speak and you say, you got 2 minutes, and you hit start, and then it rings and you say, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And it can be really hard sometimes, and you have to say, no, I mean, thank you very much.
I mean, there's two kinds of things that happen. Sometimes you get in meetings and somebody in the audience just is intent on talking, right? And the other is you get into a meeting and there's just lots of folks who have lots of points of view on it. In either case, setting the rules ahead of time is really, really important. And do your homework. Don't go into a meeting and go, oh my gosh, what's everybody doing here? Right? I mean, you try to figure out what's going on so you can anticipate it, so you set rules for the conduct of the meeting that are reasonable. You know, got 3 people, 3 minutes. You got 20 people, you know, you're not going to do three minutes. So be prepared, set the rules up ahead of time. And when the public comment period is over for a public hearing, that's it, right? If you had something to say, you should have said it. Time, we're over. I know on the select board, when it's not a public hearing but just a topic, we'll have public comments, as Steve said, and when we're finished with those public comments, we'll talk, but somebody might have something else to say. I think it's the chair's discretion then, should you allow that. But public hearing has to be a little bit more focused. What's next? Let's go to Diane. Dan, we'll come over to you. Yes, go ahead.
I have a reverse question.
Uh-oh.
What if the chair decides that the public can't speak or can't participate? Or decide that if the public does say something, they're just going to sit and look at you and not respond? How does that work?
Well, for a public hearing, the public is entitled to talk. But a public meeting, it's the discretion of the chair. My experience has been, even when the chair might say, we're not going to take public comments, the other board members, if their perception is that that's really not going to be in the best interest of getting a good decision, will encourage the chair to change their mind. It's a judgment call. My experience, somebody's got something to say, let them say it.
Following up on that question, if the chair chooses not to accept public comment, and they do have the discretion to make that decision, can it be perceived to be an abuse of that discretion not to take public comment on a substantial matter?
The question is, the chair has the discretion to decide whether or not there's going to be public comments. Could it be seen as an abuse if the chair says nobody's talking, right? Is there a law? Public hearings are different.
Yeah, you know, and I think I would say there, in my experience on many committees and boards throughout the years, that I think there will be agreement here, best practice is to let people speak, whether it's a technical requirement or not. Public hearing, you have no choice. Public meeting, yes, you do have the choice. I think that should be exercised very cautiously to not allow someone to speak. But where it really will land on the chair's lap is when you can't get someone to stop speaking once you've opened that door, and that's just a question of effectively running the meeting. But best practice is let people speak.
Does that answer it? Steve?
I also think if that situation arises and you're a board member or just a committee member, an engagement with the chair is similar to the public. You can address the chair and say, request that he or she reconsider. that decision, or even have that, it's almost like a discussion, what's the reason why, and, try to, diplomatically encourage that we open it up to the public. I mean, they're all joining us for the evening. Let's let them participate.
Yeah, everybody's trying to do a good job. Carmen, do you want to comment?
Another piece of this, I think, is the frustration that people feel sometimes when they ask a question and they don't get an answer from the board or the committee, where the board or committee is just saying, "Thank you for your comment, next." I think if the question is one where a member of the public is asking the committee to get into a debate over something, then it's appropriate for the committee to not get into the debate. But if it's a simple question about process or timing or facts, then I think the better practice is for board and committee members to respond to those kinds of inquiries. But it's also good practice not to get into a debate.
So I have a follow-up to that. So let's say it's a gray area, and it's something that's definitely not on the agenda, and the board or committee gets into a back and forth with the person who's making the comment. To me, that's not appropriate because other citizens didn't know that topic was going to be discussed. And as much as they want to engage because they think it's such an important issue, I would say that it's probably best not to do so.
And if you explain that, if you give a reasonable explanation for why that is not appropriate, that's acceptable, and then that's on your record, it's reflected in your minutes, you've accomplished.
You said one of the magic words, though. If it's not on the agenda, you ought not to be talking about it, right? You can acknowledge it. You should acknowledge, so if you raise something that's not on the agenda, I think the chair can certainly acknowledge it and indicate this is something we'll have to take up at another time. It's not on the agenda. You just get yourself in terrible trouble if you just walk down that path. Yes.
So, I'm concerned with this, that there's no opportunity for public comment unless the chair says. Then what is the mechanism for public input into the decision-making process? And I've been to meetings where letters have been read into the record. And is that the public's fallback strategy, making written comments ahead of the game? I'm just wondering where the public comes in.
So the question is, if it's the chair's discretion to say we're not going to talk about this, how does the committee learn what the public is concerned about? And is the fallback to not being able to verbally talk, sending written communication to the committee or the board? I suppose the last part of your question is, yes, you can always do that, and correspondence is recognized and made a part of the record when it's recognized. But what about the first part of the question? Is it an abuse of the chair's prerogative, and how does the public get input if the chair's not putting up with it?
I have a simple solution. It's called notice up a public hearing. Take the comment and then make your decision. That's the solution.
Well, that's a public hearing. You have to have public input at a public hearing, but it's when the selectmen meet, it's a public meeting. Sometimes we have public hearings inside, that. But if it's a topic like, how about a dog park, right? What if we just sat there and decided without hearing from the public? You would hear it. I've never seen, on my time on the finance committee and on the select board, I've never really seen a situation where the public has had something to say and hasn't been given the opportunity to say it. You have to be respectful of everybody's time, too. You can't let somebody just wander around, talk their brains out, and cause everybody to be late going home again. I can't read that far away. Schools, I've heard of them. Kids go there, don't they? Well, they run their meetings in terms of public comments. They do something very different than the select board does. They have public comments at the beginning of every meeting. And you sign in with your name. I don't know exactly what else you put on it. And you give it to the chair, and the chair goes through all of the people who wanted to speak at the beginning of every meeting. The selectmen don't do it that way. Our public comments are at the end, and then public comments with respect to any particular issue. Steve?
We do. The public does have kind of a fallback recourse too. If that's happening, I mean, every committee, every town committee or board has a select board member who is a liaison. So if something is happening, you're a member of the committee, even a member of the committee or the public can contact that person. I don't think I've ever met a select board member who never thought, who would not have supported no public comment at any time. That would be we could engage in that conversation as well, for at least for future meetings, to, really make that effort to allow for that.
Yeah, I think you do it at your own peril if you, I think you had a question next. I don't think people pretend.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. So I didn't mean to give the impression that at a hearing everyone is just, it's pro forma. It's not at all. And in my personal experience, particularly hearings where large members of the public do come and do participate, that has tremendous value. And it has absolutely affected the way I'm perceiving the information before me. I think we all have that experience at town meeting. I've often gone to town meeting and I pretty much thought I knew how I was going to vote, and I hear the debate and it has an impact and it affects me. That is the same when you're sitting on a board at a public hearing. So I did not mean to give the impression that it's just pro forma. It's not at all.
Okay. You had a question?
Yeah. Not to belabor the issue, but I was curious if the circumstances arises in a public meeting where the chair decides not to entertain a question from the public, would it be appropriate for the board to vote and say, we want to hear this comment from the public? Would that be the solution?
Well, certainly that could be the case. Any member of a board can, if it's appropriate, make a motion to come before the board. And so, sure. But again, in my own limited experience, I've never been in a meeting where a chair has said, nobody's talking about that except us. That's just like, yeah, sure, artist. Sorry. No, it automatically goes. Huh? Oh, sorry. If somebody writes to a committee, you write to me, is it now go to all the selectmen, or is it just mine? If you're writing to me as a selectman, then it goes to everybody. It would be included in our weekly correspondence. We get a package of material every Friday with the correspondence. The only time that's not true is when there's like voluminous correspondence. So I mentioned a dog. We've got a big binder full of communications on that, and a couple of other issues. But yes, it goes to everybody. Is it true of all committees? Carmen.
a good reminder for committee chairs is that you should be distributing communications that you get to your whole committee, as well as any individual committee member, because sometimes someone will contact a particular person that they know on a committee who isn't necessarily the chair, and that person should be sharing whatever communications they get, whether it's email or letter, with the whole committee. Sometimes that's tricky for people because they may feel that they've gotten a personal communication that the individual didn't mean to be broadly broadcast, and so that may be a discretionary thing. If it's a personal friend who's given a comment, you might say, I would like to share your comment with the committee, and give the person an opportunity to say, no, please don't. But in general, it's important for information to get shared.
So just to follow up to that, what if the communication goes to staff and staff is asked to share? Is it their responsibility then to forward to the chair or just to automatically share it broadly?
Our experience on Andrew Marr as our administrative person, if you send something to Andrew, he'll send it to all of us. And that should be the practice. As I overlooked you before, I'm sorry. I know. So what's the question?
I have a question, and I'm trying to formulate this in my mind, but this seems to be a broader issue of how the town ensures that all public input is heard before deliberating on any issue. Obviously, if there's a hearing, we can go to the hearing, but as we all know, we're a town of traveling gypsies sometimes, and it's hard to make all meetings. So if we have concerns or we want to voice an opinion, first of all, there's the challenge of finding out what meetings are happening, what the issues are on those meetings, and then, secondly, determining, well, what kind of input can I give, where do I need to be to give it, how can I give it? And I think that this is a really challenging issue when there are so many committees and events going on, and yet I think the citizens of Concord want to be engaged. And just as an outside example, today, finding out about this meeting was not necessarily very easy. I'm not sure where it was posted or to whom, and I know it was meant for committee members, of which I'm not, but there's a large segment of us here today who are observers on committees. Right. And so that's question number one, and I'll ask my second question at a later point.
Well, let me broadly answer this question. Communication is always the most challenging thing you face. You do everything you can think of to make people aware of something, and Tom walks into the room and says, I never heard of that before. What's going on here? It's very challenging. On the town website, all meetings are listed by calendar, and if you click on any of them, you're taken to a place where you can get the agenda if it's posted, and it's supposed to be posted, and the minutes. So, and you can sign up on the town website to be alerted to certain meetings. So if you have an interest in a committee X, whatever it is, sign up and you'll be notified. But it's a continuing problem. Every time when we sat down to think about this, we spent a lot of time, how are we going to tell people, what are we going to do? And we thought we'd come up with a good solution to that, and then
So we want to know how to reach people. So if you didn't hear about it, where did you look that we didn't reach you? You're writing these down. Absolutely. Let us know how to reach people.
And I think that we have to engage more versus less. And I know that's time consuming, but it really is
Well, it is time consuming, and it's also, you know, the difference between committees like the Select Board and NRC and those that have staff, and then the smaller committees who are just a group of citizens that meet and try to do their best. They maybe are working to really kind of. Ingrid, did you?
We used to have the town manager's report online. It's disappeared. I think that could be a very valuable source of sharing information, important hearings coming up.
I didn't know it disappeared. Aaron?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Sorry. So I just started. Come forward. Okay, into the camera. So the Aaron Stevens. I'm the public information officer. You can find my information online if you need to reach me. So the town manager's reports have not been going out because there was not a public information officer to create them. I have been here for just about 3 weeks now, and the previous public information officer left, I believe, in January. So if that's when they started to lag off, that's why. I will be starting them again soon.
Thanks.
Would you accept some suggestions of topics and material that could...
Of course you would. Just go online and find her email address and bombard her, right? Thanks. Steve?
One of the suggestions, I think it's kind of new to me as well, is using Twitter. I know it's funny, but if you're able to go to, no, it's true. If you're able or you access the Yahoo group, the Twitter feed on your laptop or computer, not necessarily your phone, could be the source just for information. So my Twitter feed for the town of Concord has the town of Concord's feed. So there's been 2 or 3 postings about our meeting a couple of weeks ago, as well as just photos just 5 minutes ago that we're having this get-together. But I use the town of Concord Police Department, Fire Department, Public Works, Concord Municipal Light Plant. So when there's a blackout, you know on your website it's happening. You know that the police shut down a road because there's an accident. So just keep it just for that. I'm not, you know, you can really find other things, but just as like an instant real-time information, you can just have an account just for town information that is happening as it occurs. So that's, as well as Facebook. But as long as you give it a try as an information source, you'd be surprised. It's new to me, but it really does work about that.
Thanks, Steve. What's next? Oh, Aaron. So did you?
Put it up on there so you guys can find it.
Do it. Well, sure.
I think Mike said that he pointed to me when he said, I didn't know about that. I'm only in my 2nd year, and I don't know a lot about things. And I think last year with the Junction Village, we had the issue of trying to get a lot of information because it was a long process that finally kind of came to resolution. And we also last year had the public-private partnership group. I think we all are making an effort on the board to try to make sure that the information, as much information as we can, gets to the public as soon as we can. But it is a difficult because there are a lot of competing interests that we have to be considerate about, and we have to be, somewhat cautious that the information that we provide, we want to make sure that it's accurate. So there is a lot of sort of difficulty in being perfect in this area. But I do think that, at least in my time on the board, there's been a real push to kind of focus on this issue.
I was pointing at you because you were just handy rather than a good example of ill-informed. Ingrid.
I have a concern about physical space. The Kais Road meeting room is
very insufficient. And I get quite frustrated when I go to meetings, not just hearings, but meetings there, and developers, petitioners are, together with the board, are looking at plans that are sitting on the table. There's no way for the public to view. Sometimes the chair will invite people up. But I really feel that the town should do something sooner rather than later about the physical space for accommodating meetings.
Yeah, that's a good point. It goes back to a question or a comment that was made about televising things. This was one of the recommendations of the Town Governance Study Committee that came out, and we moved to do that. It's a combination of physical space and the technology. I know I was a liaison to NRC when I first came on the select board, and all kinds of detailed stuff I could never see it. And Delia would invite you to come up, but if a room's full of people, you all can't do that. I think it's a real challenge for the town. So it's a good reminder.
Can I add to that, Mike, that it's something that, the boards are very aware of that issue and the restraints in the room and share that frustration. And I know currently I'm a member of the Natural Resources Commission. The room has been reconfigured, and we're, considering, like the planning board does, of having applications filed in electronic form so that they can be displayed up on a bigger screen. So these things we're aware, and it's being worked on. It is challenging.
So I would just add, I don't think in all my time on the select board as a liaison, nobody does it better than the Public Works Department. And they do precisely that. Everything is on a screen, it's on the wall, and when they have their easel up, they've got it located in a different place in the room than where other committees who use that Kai's Road room put the easel, and they've got it in a place where everybody in the room can see it. So committee members who are interested in how to do that better, you can talk to the Public Works Department. They seem to have it down.
Thank you, Carmen. Yes, Diane?
Mike once spoke about maybe getting YouTube access for being able to very quickly and efficiently film every committee meeting, and then people being able to dial on YouTube and see those meetings.
Right.
What kind of progress are we making on that?
Some, but slow. Some, but slow. Some, but slow. We are making progress. Again, it's a technology issue. You can come in and film a room by putting a camera someplace, but then if there's any movement or something to see other than where you pointed the camera, we all now have to have somebody there to manage the camera. So it gets to be, a little more complicated than just sticking a camera in a room unless, so we're working on it, working with CCTV, and we'll make progress, but it's likely to be slow. Yes? Yep.
It seems to be optional for people who are on boards. Is it mandatory for town employees?
I don't know the answer to that. This is not. I'm sorry. This meeting appears to be voluntary. Is it required of town employees to come to this, you mean? Well, this is the second time we've done this. Again, this comes from the Governance Study Committee. They recommended, so 2 years ago, working with the then town clerk and members of the select board and Court Booth, we put this on at the high school. And then we're putting it on now. And the plan going forward with this is to take some parts of the presentation that are like the discussion of the open meeting law or perhaps ethics, and see if we could get Carrie and Carmen to go into a CCTV studio and shoot it. And then it could just be up and you could get it anytime you want, and then have the discussion part of it be a forum like this. This, if you haven't picked it up, over there are two pieces of material. This effective governance workshop, that's what we put together for this. We didn't. Carrie did. And this committee handbook is really nice. It's got lots of stuff in it, and this will be the handout that any committee member gets when they come in to take their oath of office and get their material. It's got all the laws in here and a bunch of stuff, so that's going to happen. I don't know about town employees and what they have to do. Thank you. Sure. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Well, Carrie's indicated that's a good question about having a training for town employees, especially those that interact a lot with boards and the like. I think that's a good suggestion, and I think we'll should figure out how to deal with it. Yes.
The materials presented today, will they be made available electronically?
I think.
The slides, the handbooks, the agenda?
Yeah, will the materials for today, the handbook and stuff, be available electronically? And the answer is yes. Some of it's already, isn't it?
From the town clerk's webpage, there is a committee resource page. We have put up the committee handbook and the reference materials. I will put up the program, and I can put up this slide presentation as well. It's not, I can't link directly to the CCTV, once they have that, but that will also be searchable through their on-demand function.
Thanks, Carrie. Well, here and then Diane.
I have a question. I've put in my green card. Nobody wants me. maybe I have too much to say.
Gotta go.
I have a question in general about hearings when they are required of the town. For instance, is there a guide that says that before any kind of deliberation, that a hearing be held of the public? And should that be the case, or how does one determine what requires a hearing?
Well, or you can talk to.
I can answer that, I think, a little bit. I think it's largely a statutory requirement. So whatever law is governing the work of your body will make that determination, and that's spelled out in the statute. And it's typically boards and commissions whose determinations affect someone's property or financial interests. So, but it's a legal determination.
Hold on.
I'm an observer for the Concord Long Range Planning Committee. For the league, and they're holding a public meeting for input. It came up on the agenda. It was not on the agenda for yesterday morning's meeting, which I will ask them about. But there will be some kind of a meeting to gather input. Now, that committee is putting together a plan for the town in terms of how we approach the next X number of years. And I'm wondering if there is a point at which that committee will be required to hold a public meeting, how they will accommodate people who may not be able to attend that meeting, because I think this is a really critical step for Concord, and certainly something that requires major public input.
First, they already have had public meetings, and there are others, that are scheduled. So they had their kickoff meeting, and there are other public hearings that are scheduled. Yeah, right, exactly. That
doesn't sound like a public hearing.
Well, I don't think it's a public hearing. It's a public meeting, right?
My question is when, how do we know when those meetings should be required? And it seems like that whole...
Well, as Lynn said, I think it's statutory, but Carmen can probably help us.
It is statutory, but there's also times when the select board has, for example, appointed a committee to look at things and charged the committee with having public hearings. So, for example, the Town Governance Study Committee, which is a committee that Mike's mentioned a couple times, their charge required them to have at least 2 public hearings, and they had those 2 plus more. We had a streetlight committee at one point that had a couple of public hearings. So there might be other specific items of broad interest to the town that the select board would decide to create hearings on. And I think that it is open to other committees to decide that they wish to have a public hearing on a particular issue. But it's typically the select board that if there's going to be a discretionary hearing, will decide to have one.
Sure. But Carmen is making a very good point. So the Long-Range Planning Committee, for example, was created by the selectmen. And I don't remember the charge exactly with respect to public hearings, but my point is, like with the public-private partnership and other committees that we set up, they bring the matter to the select board. And we could then hold even a public hearing. So there could be public hearings with the committee, but when we take it under advisement, because we will have to ultimately, in some sense, adopt it, right, then we would hold hearings. That's what we did with public-private partnership, for example. So write to selectmen, write Tom. Dan, did you still have a question? Okay. What else? Yes. Yes, ma'am.
So a committee has a stacked agenda. There's a lot to do, and they don't get a quorum together. They're waiting and waiting, and the quorum never forms.
At a particular meeting, okay, what do you do? Can you meet? I think that's not exactly correct.
You can't meet. I think you can.
You can meet.
You can schedule a site visit. You can. There are some small things you can do without a quorum, but you can't address your agenda items without a quorum.
You can meet. You can talk about things, but you can't take any judgments. And at the next meeting, where you do have a quorum, you have to report out everything that was talked about at the other meeting. Is it a good idea? If you don't have a quorum, my personal view is send everybody home, get the meeting scheduled again, right? Tom, just say.
Carl Packard, Finance Committee. We, and I think other committees, when the chair or the staff person associated with the committee thinks there might not be a quorum, we have, whatever holiday coming up or something like that, we do try to poll the members to make sure that we are going to have a quorum, and if it appears we're not, then cancel the meeting, yeah.
You can answer your own question.
Yes, I'm going to answer because I forgot to bring it up, really. And this is something that has changed in the interpretation by the Division of Open Government. If you don't have a quorum, the only thing you can discuss is scheduling another meeting. And I wanted to draw attention to it because that is something that is a very different interpretation than what they've had in the past.
News to me. Yeah. Aren't I correct also that you cannot phone the members who aren't there in order to obtain a quorum? The person has to be there for the quorum.
Yeah, you have to have.
Phone a person and have them added and sort of participate, but they don't count for the quorum issue.
They don't count for the quorum issue. Can they vote?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's true for everybody except the Disability Commission, who have a special statute that allows them to have participants who are participating by telephone count as part of their quorum.
Nancy? The new policy is the only thing you can discuss if you don't have a quorum is scheduling a new meeting. And that's probably smart. I didn't know it, though. What's next? Tom?
Well, I think what's next
Oh.
is probably nothing is next. We can. I think we need to thank the individuals who participated. A lot of effort obviously went into this. I would also just remind people that the League of Women Voters are sponsoring a public forum on September 27th at the Trinity Church, 81 Elm Street, at 7 p.m. for refreshments, 7:30 for program, for preparation for town meeting, quote, the purest form of democracy. So hopefully that will also be a very active and interesting meeting, but very much appreciate everybody coming. If other questions pop up as you're heading home or thinking about what's going on, please communicate them. We'll try to get answers to those questions. There are all the documents there. There's some food, and we're not kicking you out, but I think the meeting's over. Thank you. Yeah.